You picture him 9 feet tall, a wall of muscle, a monster in bronze. That's the image you grew up with. That's the image most people carry their whole lives. But the real answer is far stranger. Somewhere between an ancient scroll and a modern printing press, Goliath grew 3 feet taller than he actually was. And the story of how that happened tells you less about a giant on a battlefield and more about how your own brain builds monsters out of fear. Start with the number. Your Bible probably says 6 cubits and a span. That works out to over 9 feet tall, taller than any confirmed human in recorded history, taller than basketball players with documented growth disorders. A figure that size shouldn't exist. But open a different manuscript and the number changes. The Dead Sea Scrolls, found in the caves of Qumran in the 20th century, contain a fragment of the Book of Samuel. In that fragment, Goliath is 4 cubits and a span, not 9 feet, closer to 6'9". Still enormous, still terrifying to a shepherd boy standing in a valley. But suddenly, human-sized enormous. The kind of tall that turns heads in a modern room, not the kind of tall that breaks the laws of biology. So which number is true? Most textual scholars now believe the shorter height came first, and the taller height crept in later, copied and recopied by scribes who were retelling a legend, not just transcribing a record. Stories grow the way rumors grow. Every retelling adds a little more height, a little more menace, until the giant in your imagination is standing on stilts, built entirely out of centuries of storytelling. Here's where it gets interesting. Even at 6'9", a real person that tall in the ancient world would have stood out because of something specific, something medical. Doctors today have a name for it: pituitary gigantism. A tumor on the pituitary gland floods the body with growth hormone before the bones finish forming, and the result is a person who towers over everyone around them. But gigantism comes with a cost. People with this condition often have poor peripheral vision. Their bones can be structurally weaker than they look. Their joints ache. Their reflexes slow. The very thing that makes them intimidating from a distance can make them vulnerable up close, especially against something small, fast, and precise. Malcolm Gladwell, the journalist and author, built an entire argument around this idea. In his book on unlikely underdogs, he suggested Goliath may have been suffering from exactly this condition, and that his famous request for a single combatant to fight, along with his slow approach toward David and his apparent need for an attendant walking ahead of him, lines up with symptoms of impaired vision. If that's true, the giant wasn't just big. He may have been struggling to see the boy who killed him. Now step back from the medicine and look at the man himself. Goliath came from a real place. Archaeologist Aaron Mayer has spent decades excavating Tel Esafi, the site believed to be ancient Gath, Goliath's hometown, in southern Israel. What his team found there wasn't a myth. It was pottery, fortifications, evidence of a genuine Philistine city with genuine warriors, some of whom, based on skeletal remains found across the region, really were taller than their neighbors. So the setting was real. The exaggeration came later. Why does that matter to you? Because you do the exact same thing Goliath's storytellers did. Every single day. Think about the last time you dreaded a conversation. A confrontation with a boss, a difficult phone call, a problem at home you kept putting off. In your mind, before it happened, how big did it get? Bigger than it turned out to be. Almost always bigger. Neuroscientist Robert Sapolsky, who has spent his career studying how the body and brain respond to threat and stress, has shown that your nervous system doesn't wait for accurate information before it reacts. It reacts to the size of a threat in your imagination, not the size of the threat in reality. Your heart rate rises, your palms sweat, your mind rehearses worst-case outcomes on a loop, the way a scribe copies a story again and again, each version slightly larger than the last. You are, in a very real sense, still adding cubits to your own giants. Think about David for a moment. Not the story David, the actual position he was in. He was young. He wasn't a trained soldier. He had spent his days with sheep, not swords. Everyone around him, including his own brothers, told him he had no business walking into that valley.
But David had already fought something smaller and just as dangerous.
A lion, a bear, predators that came for his flock in the dark, when there was no army watching and no glory to be won. He had already learned that fear exaggerates the enemy, and that the way through fear isn't to match its size. It's to trust the skill you've already quietly built when nobody was measuring you. That's the part of the story people skip. David didn't win because he was fearless. He won because he had already survived smaller versions of the same fight. And those smaller fights taught him something the crowd in the valley didn't understand yet. Size isn't the same thing as danger. Height isn't the same thing as an advantage. He picked 5 smooth stones from a stream bed. Not 1, 5. Because even a boy with faith planned for the possibility that his first shot might not be enough. That's not blind confidence. That's preparation wearing the mask of faith. And when the stone connected, it didn't land on armor. It landed on the one part of Goliath left exposed, the forehead. The same place where a man struggling to track fast movement would be slowest to react. The giant fell. And for a moment, the whole battlefield had to recalculate what size actually meant. Here's the question worth sitting with. What is 9 feet tall in your life right now? What conversation, what deadline, what fear have you been quietly adding cubits to every time you think about it? What story have you retold yourself so many times that the threat has grown taller with every version? The text itself seems to be warning you about this. Buried in the manuscripts, in the gap between 4 cubits and 6 cubits, is a lesson older than the printing press. Fear doesn't lie about the existence of a threat. It lies about the size of it. You don't need the threat to shrink before you're allowed to move. You need to recognize that some of its height was never real to begin with, that some of it was added later by voices that weren't even there, that some of it was added by your own mind, standing at a distance, doing exactly what every scribe before you has always done. You still picture him 9 feet tall, but maybe the real giant was never the one standing in the valley. Maybe it was the one your imagination built while you stood at the edge of it, deciding whether to walk in at all.